beautiful. So for your logo, you have this hexagon with a Ouroboros around a honeybee. So I think, can you explain that to me?
Yeah.
Why a Ouroboros and why a honeybee?
So in 2017, I found my shamanic lineage, and it's a form of honeybee and serpent shamanism that originates in Western Europe. Now, those symbols and animals are found connected with shamanism throughout the whole world, but this particular flavor of it comes from Western Europe and essentially survived as a folk tradition in these very private cells and then opened up to teach about 20 years ago. So it has roots throughout Western Europe, possibly reaching back to the Oracle of Delphi, who is known as a bee priestess, Gaia, Mother Earth, being the queen bee, and the Melissae were the priestesses that served her, which means bee. So the way of the Melissae, or the path of pollen, is the lineage that I've studied with and continue to study with in the UK. And both the serpent and the bee are very key in their teachings, and sort of the spirits or the metaphors or the symbols that we work most closely with. Both of them are the oldest symbols for the sacred feminine, for a goddess. The bee and the serpent throughout the world and throughout history is connected to the sacred feminine. And both because of the sacred feminine and the resonance of that symbology of them being connected to the sacred feminine, I wanted to evoke that and heralding to my shamanic training as well. The hexagon is a symbol of protection and power, and so actually our first temple in 2019 was a hexagon, and it's one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Secure, not secure, one of the most strong shapes, geometric shapes is the hexagon. And it's amazing that the bees make these like mathematically perfect hexagons as their honeycomb, and how strong the honeycomb is, that it's this malleable material and yet incredibly strong in it and has the structural integrity. So I use the hexagon as the container for the Ouroboros serpentine flow, the Ouroboros as the I think I have it as a circle in my glyph, but that it's the serpent eating itself. So, and I've had some very powerful visions of the Ouroboros and experiences with that. But it's a symbol of infinity. It's also a symbol of life eating itself, devouring itself. And there's one element of that that can be quite horrific, but there's also an element of that that is ecstatic and incredibly true. The sense that all of creation is continually birthing and devouring, and that those processes are actually one. And that to me is one of the core mysteries of the sacred feminine. I also think it's one of the reasons that the sacred feminine has been so suppressed, because there is this element of the unification of destruction and creation, of birth and death, that is very difficult for the intellectual egoic mind to accept. And the feminine invites the accepting that all of life is a sacred process, the agony and the ecstasy, the horror and the beauty, that all of that is contained within life. So I love the Ouroboros as being the symbol of that. And to go deeper into the honeybee, everything that the honeybee creates is medicinal, from the honey to the propolis to the comb to its sting. There's what is it, apitherapy uses the venom as a healing modality. So everything the honeybee creates, including its venom, its sting, is healing. And again, there's that property of yes to the nectar that is produced, yes to that, delicious smell of beeswax that the honeys create, but that they also have this ability to sting, and that even that is in service to the hive and in service to life.
One thing you said was the time has come for the return of the mother. The time has come for the return to wholeness. The time has come for the return of the felt knowledge that we are one with all that is, that all is sacred, and that we ourselves are divine beings living in physical form. It was beautiful. So, how did you come to that philosophy? Or how did you come to that? Yeah, how did you come to that philosophy or knowingness? And
I received it. So the foundation of my work comes through my mother, Connie Huebner, and her work is called Divine Mother Healing and Guidance. And I started training with her when I was 16 and got a particularly heavy dose, being that I was her daughter. But at the heart of her technique is teaching people how to have a direct relationship with Divine Mother, with the divine, how to receive direct transmissions, how to unify and feel yourself as one. And then she has a vibrational healing modality, which is essentially about clearing away the blockages that get in the way of our perception of that. So my mother was a transcendental meditation teacher, and her experience grew out of going into that deep, deep transcendent level and then encountering an interactive presence, the Divine Mother. So the Divine Mother is the relational element of what we might call Great Spirit, the mystery, and she wants to have a relationship with us. She's the principle of sacred immanence, the divine within, the divine in density, in the flesh, in the material, the felt, the experiential. And she holds the principle of wholeness. She holds the oneness principle, that we are all one, that there isn't a separation between spirit and matter, that spirit and matter are unified in the presence of the mother. And so that message is actually something that comes through in dropping in with her all the time. It's repeated over and over. We are whole. We are one with all that is. All is sacred. We are whole. We are one with all that is. All is sacred, as really being her primary philosophy. Um, and it doesn't feel right even to call it a philosophy, because certainly the way it's received is as gnosis, as truth. And I have found that in taking that as a personal philosophy, it's incredibly fascinating what starts to fall into place, and also where and how you meet challenges. All is sacred. We are one with all that is, and all is sacred. So again, that takes us back into that sense of the Ouroboros, and that sense of, oh my, like, if all is sacred, what do we do about the problem of good and evil? Does that mean that, the horrors that exist are also sacred? And can it be true that it's horrific and also sacred? It brings in like the both and. It brings in this like huge overarching container of how we start to engage with reality and ourselves, and engage, and that's utterly alchemical and transformational, to start receiving all of life as sacred, even the painful parts, is dramatically transformational. And it's not easy. It's some of the most challenging work that you can enter into. And of course, that happens externally, but probably most importantly, it happens internally, or it ought to happen internally, where we look at where have we cast out parts of ourselves? Where have we deemed an aspect of ourselves to be unholy, unworthy, and attempted to shut it out, cast it out? And so the wisdom of wholeness is like, no, like even the seed of your shame is sacred. And so welcome it back in and recognize that all aspects of you are a facet of goddess, of the divine, inviting you into knowing who you really are.
Well, so we are swimming in the waters of, modernity, right? The ethos is individualism. Things are broken into parts. Uh, there's those of us who practice religion who have a practice with um, relating to the divine to whatever degree that we can or do. Um, but it does, um, it definitely feels like we're missing something. And what it sounds like what your work is reconnecting with something that, would it be fair to say that we kind of toss it aside at some point in the name of, I don't know, rationality or what?
I mean, that, yes, I mean, I think that there's been hundreds, if not thousands of years of suppressing feminine spiritual pathways to awakening. There's been such a strong preference to masculine forms,
Mm.
and all is holy and all is sacred. So it's not even necessarily that there's something that is uh, wrong in that preference for the time that it was a preference. My sense is that it served a purpose, and the time has come that we reincorporate the other side, that we
Yeah.
bring her back. And there has certainly been a tremendous amount of wounding that has resulted in that preference and that imbalance. So uh, some of the differences that I see is more masculine forms tend to be focused on ascension. It's like the God in heaven rather
Mm.
than the mother in earth or in body. There tends to be purity around it, of like we have the which has its place, right? Like the sense of integrity check around certain things, or doing it just so. But then what you also get creeping in is the sense of sin and judgment, and some of these aspects that are really harmful, and the separation from the body. So that's one of the major signs, is the separation of the body, that the body becomes something that is sinful, undesirable, unholy, something to overcome. And that relationship is also with the earth. So the way that we treat nature, the way that we treat our nature, and the way that we treat Mother Nature is the symptom of this deep wounding and lack of understanding with the feminine. And I can understand it in that, like, she contains horror. She does. If you look at nature and you look at how animals devour each other, the undeniable truth that you see in nature, that all of us are going to die.
Mm.
I think that there's a part of the ego that is in deep rebellion of
Oh
that
yeah.
truth,
Oh yeah.
and has tried to control it, has tried to, like, let's button that up. Let's, like, not go there. Let's really keep a lid on, all of, like, the wild primal dynamic elements of our nature and nature. And of course we are killing nature due to that
Yes.
imbalance. So the return, and what feels missing, is the sacredness of matter. And of course, the origin of the word matter is mater, which means mother.
Hmm.
So the
Didn't know that.
return of the sacredness of matter, which includes all of the world around us, and which includes our own bodies, as well as the immanent, like the direct experience, that there doesn't need to be an intermediary between you and God or spirit, that you get to know for yourself. And 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 then the ecstatic technologies, which have been really suppressed because they are wild. So basically, like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. you know
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the
Interesting.
way that
Yeah.
they exist now is more hedonistic. There's this quote that Nietzsche quote that I love, which is, um, Christianity gave Eros poison to drink. He did not die from it, but degenerated to vice.
Hmm.
And I
Interesting.
love that
Wow.
because it's like, that is the shadow, right? Like they poisoned Eros, who is a god. And of course it didn't die. But in that poisoning, it turned into something uh, monstrous. And so there's
Yes.
been a lot of abuse of the ecstatic, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. However, those technologies, to use a non-natural term, those technologies are main lines to the divine. When you can use, it's like the ecstasy of coming together and moving and breathing and dancing and the drum beat, like that is a main line to divinity. The way that plant medicines are going through a revival, like these medicines, these drugs in the correct container offer a main line into the divine. Sex and sexuality is Shakti. It is goddess. It is that absolute ecstatic reality that life itself is a sexual experience, not
Hmm.
tied to the like our genitals, but tied to our whole being being an ecstatic experience. So no wonder they were controlled, and no wonder they degenerated to vice. So part of the reclamation of the feminine work is to reclaim those with impeccable integrity so that they can become the access points that they're meant to be.
Right. And you use a few of those main lines with your clients, it sounds like, and I want to come back to that. How you mainline your clients back to the sacred feminine, divine feminine. But first, I had just a curiosity, so do you have any sense of kind of where? So we had these, we'll say, more sacred feminine, and we had more of the sacred feminine in our spirituality, in our shamanism, in our religions. And then, as far as I can tell, maybe around the where the desert religions came out around Christianity, it became a little bit more masculine or patriarchal, and at some point it became puritanical, which is the opposite of what you know what you're about. Um, do you have any sense of why there was that pivot?
I mean, that's like a question, a huge question. Yeah,
Yeah,
why did? And what's so fascinating is like patriarchy came in across the globe, right? Like
yeah,
it wasn't like, oh, it originated here and then spread. Like it sprouted in cultures throughout the whole globe.
yeah.
And
That's interesting too. It's like
I
the 100th
know,
monkey kind of a thing. Yeah,
right? Yeah. And yeah, certainly before that, to my knowledge, before that, which was primarily kind of pre-ag, so pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer living in close proximity, was mother-based religions. And you still get a lot of that in early agricultural societies like Mesopotamia. You have the goddess Inanna who moved into Ishtar. These were powerful, powerful goddesses. There are many African goddesses that were incredibly powerful, Mamiwata and the Orishas, and early Greek culture really valued the goddess, and you can actually start to see the tip over into patriarchy through their mythology. So to go back to the oracle of Delphi, Delphi originally was a temple dedicated to Gaia, Gaia being the primordial creator goddess. She was a titan. She was one of the early early goddesses. And her daughter was Python, the serpent, the great earth serpent. And so it was said that the oracle sat above the crack in the earth and received her wisdom from Python, Gaia's daughter. And that's how she received her oracular wisdom. And then slowly was this tip into patriarchy. And then the myth became that Apollo, the god of the sun and the god of light, came in and killed Python and severed Python and buried Python's body beneath the temple. And yet still it is Python that is whispering up the wisdom to the oracle. So then Delphi became a temple to Apollo rather than Gaia. So you can see this transference, and from my knowledge, most scholars believe that it was a slow transference, and the why is pretty unknown. And I almost just want to like feel into if I can feel a why. I have a myth that I've received in my own explorations that I can kind of summarize. I think ultimately we don't know. Like we don't know why it is that there was this swing from mother-based religions into patriarchal, other than there was some part of human evolution that was growing in that way across the globe. I remember the myth that I received on it is, in the beginning we were one, and the mother was one, and we were one with the mother. And so you think about how, as a baby growing in your mother's womb, you are one with the mother. You're essentially an extension of her body, not even an extension when you're in the womb. And then there's this process of birth, which is traumatic. We're born through the yoni, which is a wound, and there is a wounding that happens in that first sensation of coming into the light, of coming into reality. And also that it's beautiful and ecstatic. So it's not that it's only painful, but there is that moment of like, you've been inside and now you've been brought out. But it's all right because the mother is holding you. And again, you're essentially still this, you're so in close and you're so held that you're still a part of the mother. As you grow, you start to adventure out. You start to know yourself as being separate. You start to learn that you actually are an independent entity. And perhaps along the way, you are wounded, and that there is something outside of yourself that hurts you. And so that again creates this deeper wound of separation. Like, oh, I am not one with everything. And the mother is not one with me. There is actually something outside of myself that can harm me. And so the wound of separation moves us into needing to protect. Mm-hmm. And from that place of protection and separation, we can move into objectifying. Because then that which hurt me becomes something that I want to control. I don't want to be hurt again. And moving us further and further apart into this sense of being other than the mother, other than the feminine, other than nature, other than the world, and how that develops. And that even that is part of this sacred process of coming to know yourself as an individual. And that's one of the kind of the gifts of the masculine, right? Is like, it's drawing these lines around things. It's like, oh no, we're this, but we're not this. And it's that, but it's not this. And I'm distinguishing myself and I'm becoming an entity that actually gets to have a relationship rather than just be in the like amoebic soup of wholeness. Like you actually get to have this sense of who you are.
Yes.
And in that sense of who you are, the longing comes forward. The longing for the beloved, the longing for the mother, but it's from a different place. And I always find it interesting that in early mythology of gods and goddesses, there's often like, it's like the mother births her son brother, and then you get this marriage. And it's not that it's meant to be incestual. It's not that. It's the analogous of the one separating and then coming back into wholeness, and that acknowledgement that we're one and we're always one, but there is a separation, and then we return in through sacred union. So through that coming in, the masculine is, and we each do this, it's not male or female, we each come into this sense of like, okay, I am now a person. And now I feel that longing for wholeness, that I feel the wound of my separateness. And so I'm going to begin to seek the beloved whole. And we get to enter back into that, but from a new perspective, not as the infant, but from our own agency and our own integrity. And so we reunite, and that could be the reuniting with the sacred feminine rather than just the mother energy, or reuniting with God, wholeness, whole, the one. So I like, there's something in that that like makes sense to me, and that it's like this big picture of like how it is meant to be, rather than um fuck the patriarchy. And there's some
Right.
elements of that too, like we've gotten into a lot of trouble. Like
Right.
we are currently kind of fucked due to that major imbalance. And what if it is all part of the sacred process of unfolding that allows us to come back into ecstatic union with the
Yeah.
whole?
Yeah. I can really get behind fuck the patriarchy, especially if we're all like in agreement that we are all in on the patriarchy. It's like
Exactly. Yeah,
we're
we're
all
all playing that
participating.
game. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So so it sounds like that's what you help people to do, is to reunite them with the sacred feminine, with the oneness. Um how do you, so you have a lot of people seeking you out for that. A lot of people hear your message and come to you. How do you help them?
So the first point of contact is contact with self. The truth of ourself is that we are one with God, one with Divine Mother. So the number one task is to make contact with yourself and to start doing the work of diving deep and clearing the rubble of separation to
Mm.
discover who you really are. And I use a lot of different tools for that. So I use my mother's practice, which is much more, it's a meditative practice. It's an internal clearing to drop them into a state, again, kind of like the transcendent. You're bringing people deep, deep, deep until they get to that sense of expansiveness and union on the interior. I also do that by connecting them to their body and using these ecstatic practices to drop them into a sense of very activated, lively experience with spirit, with self. And then some is more direct coaching or shadow work. I bring in the work of Byron Katie occasionally, but looking at the parts, like what
Mm.
parts of you have been cast out, and reclaiming them.
Mm.
My background is in theater, so I love to bring in a sense of playfulness with that, of giving yourself permission to animate the shadow as a way of giving it full expression and then welcoming it in. So I definitely have a lot of different ways that I massage that connection. But the primary, gosh, can I even point to the primary tools? The primary tools is the Divine Mother work, which holds a level of clarity and integrity, and that guiding principle of wholeness. Embodiment work, and there's a whole set of a whole variety of practices and ways that we can embody breath, will, imagination, movement, um, and ritual. And ritual and ceremony ties in the theatrical. And certainly, like I always like to frame imagination as your superpower. So it's amazing what we can experience. It's not yeah, it's amazing what we can experience when we invite the imagination to come online, to dive into exploring what is true, and then inquiry, who are we really, and what's at the heart of who we are, and how do we seek and find that out, and then how do we act in the world. So that's the other piece that I think can that some people get stuck in the like continual self-processing or
Mm.
self-healing, um,
Hmm.
miss the piece of being in service and miss the piece of being in community. And so certainly what's on the horizon for me next is drawing for much more people into community and circles of practice and communion, so that it's not isolated, that it's about how are you serving the world, how are you showing up relationally and in sacred community with each other, because we have a whole lot of work to do, and it's not going to happen just by healing the self internally. It's going to happen through service.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's the logical next step. Cool. So, yeah, I'd love to zoom in on this around these things of imagination and um, theater or performance. Um, and I'll do my best to kind of pave the way, but maybe I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, so you can help me understand. So when people think of imagination, the word imagination has associations with the unreal. And so does acting and theater, at least for me, have an strong association with pretending, and pretending isn't reality. So, and I'll back up too. One more step is just for those listening. So you have a large background in acting, in theater, and that has been incorporated. What is I find unique about you is that you really incorporate um, theater performance in a beautiful way. By the way, I was at your wedding, and it's the by far my favorite wedding ceremony that I've ever been to. I'm digressing a little bit, but in that you had in the ceremony, you mashed up a bunch of 80s pop lyrics with a lot of the ancient scripture quotes, and probably a lot more that I can't remember. And it really worked. And I was, as I was looking at your website, I was wondering, is that what she's talking about when she's talking about the integration of bringing the sacred and the profane? Um, is our is pop culture,
The
and yeah, is that the profane, or am I just and as I'm talking about it, I'm like, oh no, you're off the mark. Is it all sacred? I mean, I guess
Well,
and
but
I'm
it is
ram
and it isn't, right? Like that's
mm,
the both and. Like it's
yeah.
all sacred, and also there is stuff out there that is profane.
Mm,
Having just been to a burn, I saw a lot of it. Um,
uh-huh.
I think that so for me, that piece of like integrating the 80s lyrics is like so much of religion has become dead. It's these dead scriptures that have lost meaning and relatability, and we want it to be alive, and it is alive. So to me, the integration with the modern, and I mean, Nathaniel of course loves this too, is like movies as modern mythology, right? It's like the scriptures are all around us, the mythos
Mm,
is all around us. I mean, part of the reason that we chose some of those 80s songs is like, I remember us, he and I were like singing and dancing around to one of those songs, and it was we were singing the lyrics, we're like, wow, like these are profound lyrics.
yeah.
These love songs are profound in what they're speaking and saying.
Yes.
And so by integrating them, it makes it something alive rather than static, and it makes it something relatable. And I always feel like levity is an opening, like humor is an opening. So when you when you touch on something that people can relate to, then all of a sudden they're engaged in the experience far more than if you were just reading, holy text that somebody's heard over and over in a monotone voice. So that like that element of aliveness and playfulness, I think is really important as a partner to the sacred. That the sacred, and this is another element of the feminine, it's like the sacred and another element of the profane actually is like, it's not just about yes, and we shall speak in this voice, and we shall only wear white, and like da, da, da,
Yeah.
da, and it must be just so. It's like it can be hilarious. It can be like
Yeah.
laughter, like wherever there is laughter, goddess is present. It can be this like wild and joyful expression and really relatable expression, something that connects immediately to the person in front of you rather than something that has been translated for thousands of years.
Mm.
So,
Great. Great. I love that. And I could, everything you say, I can so relate to. I don't think I thought of it until I saw it performed. I don't think I appreciated pop culture for being what it was, how actually sacred it is to me. But I kept it in this box, right? Is like, I had a line drawn around it. And that's interesting because now I'm relating it to what you were saying earlier. So the feminine is the one, and then the masculine kind of cuts up the one into, you know, a million pieces, right? And okay, so which is useful for sure. But so I'm just speaking from my experience. But when I do that, one of the downsides of that is I forget that it's all the one. So when I draw a line between 80s lyrics and Holy Scripture, then I'm missing the bigger picture there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of the challenge and the invitation is like this has been part of my own personal work is to hunt out all places that I'm pointing to saying, "Oh, but not that." Like, where am I believing that it's not the one? Where am I believing that I am not the one? Where am I believing that life is not the one? And to hunt out those places. Oh, no, this is holy. That's not holy. Ooh, is that true? Is it really true?
Yeah.
And it's something that it I mean, this is an experience that came through in a really radical plant medicine journey initiation, and it breaks the egoic mind because the egoic mind really wants to hold on to the good and bad, to understand it, to make sense of it, to keep itself safe, and um, and so that type of non-dual way of relating like really breaks down the rational mind. um yeah, so there can
Mm.
be a lot of resistance, and it's just fascinating to look at like where are we still holding on to it being something separate or different or wrong. And that's not to say that we don't get to have discernment. I think that that's the real trick, and where like non-dual can easily switch into spiritual bypassing. And so like again it's like, well, if the all is sacred, then discernment or judgment must also be sacred. There
Mm-hmm.
must also be something in that that has value. And this is, the integral perspective that I know, um, that and love too, is that like, yeah, it's the both and in all cases.
Yes.
So all is sacred, and there are some things that are really horrific. And can we hold both of those truths at the same time?
I'm just still caught up on how much I love the pop culture stuff and what that brings up. And things that I've heard too from other teachers talking about how, we say we live in a atheistic or agnostic society, but we all go to rock concerts. And what is it about rock concerts? And I can tell you, I'm not much of an intellectual, but I can tell you what it feels like to be at a rock concert. And it feels like ecstasy. So yeah, it's resonant.
And
So
it's even like I watched like the new Elvis movie. Have
I
you seen
was
that?
going to bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you see, and he did such a good job of embodying Elvis. but you see him like get started, and it's Kundalini. Like he is activating a
Yeah.
Kundalini awakening by embodying it in himself. And then these super repressed women, like it was women that were losing their shit, because women, you know, the Kundalini is usually just right there on the surface, aching to be set free. So like Elvis was awakening Kundalini, and it was this wild, ecstatic awakening that was happening. It's so cool. And the only downside is because there isn't always knowledge that that's what's happening. Like essentially, if it were held in the correct container, like Elvis would be like the high priest of like an ecstatic ritual, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
And it is not held in that context, and so then there can be these integrity slips, which then unfortunately cause harm, and then that feeds into the story of it being wrong or bad or dangerous, because there's some truth to that. I mean, there's a lot of rock stars that abuse their power in really unfortunate ways, but what they're bringing forward on stage is like the living God.
Yeah. I loved Elvis for exactly that reason. I was blown away. I realized watching, I was like, oh my God, you and I have only lived in a post Elvis era. But before that, the repression was unbelievable. It's like, it's like, so I mean, he didn't revive it alone, but he was quite the steward for it. It's like, it seemed like so the body, the hedonistic, was in the blues, and in that subculture, in a culture that was associated with being I can't think of the right word, but less than, it's looked down upon, for sure. And he brought that in and saw, somehow he saw or felt, um, how it was quite similar to gospel. It's like you had the high and the low, and he, using his body actually as a conduit and all of his creativity, just was able to integrate those two forms into. So it's like to create a synergy between the lower and the upper, and I use those in quotations, and create something completely novel, like an emergent new thing that I'm thinking led to the entire 60s and the sex, drugs, and rock and roll movement. So this big wave. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It yeah. And so, I was born in the 80s, so we are well underway by that point, but I could still just really appreciate what happened there, and thank God that I was born when I was born and not prior. Um, there's another thing in that's exactly what we're talking about, what you're talking about, where Tom Hanks's character was a snowman for carnivals, and he said that what he got as a salesman is what really sold were things that people liked but thought that they shouldn't be liking them, which is very, retrieval of the disowned, the repressed, the disassociated, the shadow, right? So, and there's ecstasy in that.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that's where the ecstasy has been pushed, is into the shadow.
Yeah.
So the reclamation of the shadow is the accessing of the ecstatic. It holds
Yeah.
all of those keys. It's like the movement, the flow, the wildness, the primordial, the violence, even the sexual. Like all of those are like the most vital aspects of life. And our puritanical way has been like, none of that.
Yes. Which is ironic because there's a bunch of dudes saying that. I don't understand why we did that.
And it comes out in all of these like degenerate ways. Whereas if they can be reclaimed as the incredible powers that they are, then they come into integrity and right relationship, and
Yeah.
violence can be power to protect, or power to take action in the world. And sexuality becomes an awakening experience. And rock concerts can literally be, you know, healing and awakening and rejuvenating um, and all of that.
Mm,
And our sexual partnerships can be that way too.
very cool. Cool. So coming back to this question I've been meaning to ask about. So acting slash theater and imagination are associated with the unreality, but it seems that you use them as doorways to a greater reality. So how does that work?
Um, it's so sweet. I'm remembering like when I was a little girl, I had such an active imagination, and I saw fairies. I believed I saw fairies. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really interesting looking back because it's so easy to be like, was that real, or was I just like very imaginative? But I remember the moment I was moving into puberty, and I came to my mom and I was sobbing, and I told her, I'm like, I know that I'm going to forget. I know I'm going to stop seeing them. And so please don't ever let me forget.
Hmm.
And that moment was so real. It was so true, that grieving for knowing that that relationship was going to pass. Um, yeah, imagination is a portal, and it's a portal into the unknowable, like into the unreal, into the beyond reality. And maybe that's a better way of saying it, because it's not like, certainly there are things that we can imagine that are not true,
Mm.
but we can also turn it on as a doorway into what is not perceivable. And acting, I think, is one of the best uh, demonstrations of this. So I started acting when I was, 7 years old, and just really dove into it. And um, Meisner was one of my the great teachers who I was learning Meisner technique, and one of his quotes is, acting is living truthfully in the moment under imaginary circumstances. And so in the Meisner technique, you're using your imagination to be truthful. So the best actors, and you can see this when you're watching people perform, like the best actors are not pretending. There's a difference between pretending and really doing it. There's a difference between somebody like like fake crying,
Yeah.
pretending to cry, and really crying.
Mm.
Like you think of like the best performances of all time, and the reason that they're so good is because there's truth in them. The actor is fully invested in the truth of that moment, and the only thing that isn't real is the frame that we've put around it,
Mm.
is the story. Like, oh well, like we've put a frame around it, and so this is the untrue thing that you have fully invested in to bring forward something that is true. And they're so resonant because they are bringing forward something that is deeply true. Otherwise, we wouldn't have such a like multi-billion-dollar film um, film business. So that was
Yeah.
always very interesting to me. Like the way that I could use my imagination to kick into something that felt incredibly true in that moment. And then as I developed spiritually, and particularly when I started getting into shamanic practices, which are more embodied and are more in this like crossing of the other realm, that was when like their primary tools are breath, will, and imagination. And so actually engaging the imagination as a tool for dropping yourself in. And so the trick is, so like acting is you're putting a false frame around something, but you're engaging truthfully within the moment. With spiritual practice, you're exploring how your imagination can be supportive in the pursuit of something that is true.
Mm.
So the first actors were shamans. Our first theater was ritual theater, in which the priest, priestess, shaman was embodying the gods. That was the first performance, was
Uh-huh.
embodying the gods and using these elements of embodiment and dance and mask to bring forward this heightened sense of the divine, of something that was known and felt to be true. And what I have found is that when you do that, it's like turning the tap on, and you are met with something on the other side that is so vital and true and ready to pour through you. And my sense is that it's actually that's on the other side all of the time of art. Like, to be an artist is to be a creator, to open your system up is to allow the force of creation of the divine to pour through you. So it's sort of that same energy all the time. It's just, again, we're using it in these ways that are um, more in the unreal than the real. So as I use it to turn it towards what I have felt, known, and discovered as being deeply true, and particularly like as I use it, I leave enough space for discovery. So the frame is you are a divine being in physical form. The frame is you are one with all that is. Now, can you use your imagination to open yourself up to the potentiality of that experience? And it's amazing how it works. It's amazing how it works. And I like when I was studying theater, it was like, and this is part of my training, is like the specificity of imagining, like what would it smell like, what would it feel like, what would your posture be like if you were a divine being, like how would you hold your body, how might you gesture, what would your voice be like, what would your presence be like in your gaze, and how would you move through space, so you do it on every level, like being rigorous in this opening of like, oh, and I'd be rooted in my hips, and then what am I the goddess of? Am I like the
Uh-huh.
goddess? Am I a particular type? Am I a particular flavor? And to start to let your whole body take on the tone and timbre, that then ties into how physicality activates things. So like there is a big difference to how I feel if I'm sitting here talking to you like this or like that,
Mm-hmm.
versus if I'm holding myself upright, or if I'm taking deep breaths, or if I'm projecting my voice. Those little cues are physical, and yet they have an immediate emotional content that follows them. They have an immediate state shift that comes with it. So again, that's one of those things, the sort of like ecstatic technologies of like, to behave as though can actually make it so, can actually create it. And so acting and imagination, it's like imagination feels like one of the most unclaimed superpowers within the spiritual world, but also within the rational world. And we think that imagination is something for kids, but it's also like how all of this is what it is.
Yeah.
Like how we're talking to each other through this
Yes.
like screen, like that's imagination.
That's right.
Imagination is what moves and drives the entirety of our world, and we've just been holding it in a much narrow focus. So to give ourselves permission to play and open and play in the unknown, um, is just this like untapped power that can give us so much. And what I found is that with spiritual work, it's almost like the imagination is just opening up the door. Once it's open, you're met with something. There's
Yeah.
something that flows in. So it's just a key. It's not like it's different. It's so I'm like even just feeling into it now, because I do feel this whenever I'm in a creative process too. It's like the very beginning might be difficult. There might be this sort of like, okay, like I'm dropping in, I'm doing the work, and it would feel like this, or it would be like this, or the story is like this. And then there
Totally.
reaches this point that opens and shifts, and then you are receiving. Like you're no longer pushing it, forcing it, like doing it. You're receiving it.
Yeah.
And that's true, I think, with art, with all forms of art, with conversation, with anything that is creative, which is most of how we move and be through life. And it's very true through the divine, through the sacred play. It's like, yep, just that like scrubbing, that work of like, ooh, am I dropped in? Am I dropped in? And it's like, and now you're receiving. And there's something much bigger than you that is moving through and creating through you.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. I have very little experience as an artist, but I'm very imaginative. And one thing, so I have a coach, and one of the things that I've foolishly committed to is writing a book. And it's fiction. It's fiction, and it's like pure hell. Things that I've learned, though, mostly I've learned that it's hell. Um, but also what I've learned is that there is a difference. So in the form of writing, there's a difference between imagining something. So I call it fabricating something, just writing something on the page, and then there's writing something that actually, and the best words I have for it is that it feels true. It's like, so I could say that some of the stuff that I put on paper isn't true, and some of it is true. And it's not true in that the objective scientific uh, use of the word. It's that I don't have a word for it, but true is the word I've got. So it's true in that sense. And I can totally relate. There's like a portal, like the sky opens up, and suddenly something, like there's a something that's beyond me that's coming in, and to the best of my ability I'm putting that on paper, uh, but it's not what's on paper that's really that interesting. It's, to me anyway, it's where is this coming from, and it's not coming from me. And that's the difference between true and untrue. That's so what I put on paper that I call fabricate, that's not true, that's coming from me. But the thing that is true is not coming from me. And so the way I'm relating to what you're saying is, oh, so Elizabeth is doing this, but it's beyond art. It's into divinity.
Mm-hmm. The
Okay.
art of being divine.
Mm-hmm.
And like an art is a art is part of it. Like particularly like in the temples that I create, we perform and it's part of it. But the part is to bring in more points of contact and access, and to like exalt it. So again, it's like you feel it even more if you're wearing the right clothes, if the light is on you in such a way, if you're surrounded and I mean, that was the foundation, the original temple impulse for the 2019 temple was the Be Divine Hive Temple, which really became the focal point of my work. It's the sense of to be divine, and it was a temple built in service to supporting women specifically in having an experience of being divine. And to do that, it was like to be utterly immersive. Like, we're going to surround you in a temple space of beauty. We're going to bathe you. We're going to anoint you. Like, you're going to be dressed in these holy robes. And it's play and it's imagination and it's theater, but it is also so true.
Mm-hmm.
So the art gets to become a part of that permission, but yeah, that it is well beyond it as well. It's about um, I mean, in many ways, it's like that was the origin of what art was for. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's expanded into being such a beautiful expression of the whole range of humanity. But all original art was about the sacred. From original cave paintings to original goddess sculptures, like it was all about honoring and evoking the sacred.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me. It's like people talk about some art is transcendent. And what are we even talking about? And I think this is what we're talking about when we say that. Yes. Some of it is just, oh, well, you did a good job. That was very skillful. And it really just doesn't speak to me. And it doesn't end up in the Hall of Fame for art. And then some really just, it stays with us longer because I guess you might say it's truer. Or, or
Yeah,
we,
it's interesting because so one of the kind of signature performances in this temple iteration is called "I Am the Living Goddess," and it is essentially our temple priestesses embodying the goddess, like using our practices to drop us in, and so there's a whole the whole performance is around what that process actually is, of using our breath, of bringing ourselves into the body, of calling her forward. And then she comes out with this clap and
mm,
begins to speak out loud, I am the living goddess, and then receive whatever comes from that. So it's gosh, just completely lost the word that starts with an I. It's completely improvised.
mm,
So what comes through when she says I am, after I am the living goddess, is received. And it is also performative. So we play with the power of witness. There's a magic that happens when somebody is watching you. But these are also women that do have practices in, vocal projection or movement. So they have access to an instrument. And certainly that's part of some of my trainings is how do you access your instrument. So if we are divine beings, then the body is our paintbrush. Like the body is, and the painting, the body is how we express our divinity. So by bringing our abilities of the body online, we have greater access to how we can express the divine through our bodies.
mm-hmm,
So my trainings focus more on that. And these women have practiced with me, but I'm also really mindful to not tip so far into the performative that we lose the roughness and the reality and the individuality of each woman. So we also have like a big scope of skill, like not a big scope. All of them have some sort of, embodied practice, whether it's dance or theater or something, most of them. But we have different body types and different age groups and different, um, you know, adeptness with the theatrical, because the whole point is to have it be real and true. So yes, to being able to do the gestures and the breath, but not too far that it becomes something that is form alone and not the
mm-hmm.
essence of what's coming through.
Yeah. I appreciate that a lot. Well, awesome. I think you nailed it. Yeah. Thank you very much. That was delightful.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, such a pleasure sharing. Thank you for your questions and inquiry.